Mon Mothma's husband in Andor, Perrin Fertha, on the surface seems to represent a privileged individual whose lack of action or seemingly care represents the kind of attitude among elites which allows Palpatine and the Empire to continue to further their oppressive actions, if only through apathy rather than actual explicit support. In his first appearance in Episode 4 of Season 1, Aldhani, there's a conversation about a dinner party between him and Mon Mothma, where people like Ars Dangor and Sly Moore, both of whom were close associates and supporters of Palpatine, were invited. Mon, who is exasperated to put it lightly, expresses how these are people who try to tear down anything she touches. Perrin, though, seems unfazed, and when they start talking about a present Mon had picked up for him from Luthans, saying she's taking it back in response to this dinner and asking how the starving Gore would feel about what Perrin calls the fun side of the table, Perrin asks the question which sets the tone for his character throughout the rest of the show. Must everything be boring and sad? So I think it's easy to look at him and dismiss him as Mon Mothma's useless husband from an arranged marriage who doesn't care about the Empire's atrocities as long as he's in his privileged position. And I think as far as it goes, that is fairly true. But rather than just dismiss him as irredeemable in that role, I think there's a mix of cautionary tale and also some hope in there. And to be clear, none of this is to say that Perrin is a depiction of a guy who's doing the right thing. But on top of looking at what systems of imperial oppression look like, and the means they use to turn public opinion against the Gorman, for example, we also see what it looks like for characters to be radicalized and get involved in the rebellion. It's easy for the audience to watch the show and say, oh, I'd be Cassian or Brasso or Mon Mothma, but in the context of our real lives, we all go along with many systems which we passively benefit from and therefore do support, if not on a philosophical level or through enthusiastic praise of it or something overt like that, then on a practical level by participating in it as long as there isn't too much pushback from others, and as long as we keep getting whatever passive benefits from it that we enjoy. For examples of this, you only have to look at things like labor exploitation to create most of the goods we use. But back to Andor, for most of the characters who we see getting involved in the rebellion, it's rarely as simple as just saying the Empire is bad and I'm going to do something about it. Usually it involves them being pushed to a position where they have to make a choice, like the choice to like this video and subscribe for more. The path of least resistance is to essentially coast along in life, and even among our protagonists, whether in Andor or other parts of Star Wars, including Luke and Han in A New Hope, they're not usually making some principled stand absent impacts on their personal life. In some cases, like probably Luke before his family gets barbecued, this could just come from them not thinking they have really a path to making an impact. But even he was going to go to the Imperial Training Academy not because he supported the Empire, but because that was just a way to get him off of Tatooine. Maybe he takes the Wedge Antilles route from there and then leaves to join the rebellion, but maybe not. Maybe he gets stuck in the Empire and thinks he can make some sort of change from the inside. For a lot of characters who end up making a big difference in the rebellion, they only get to that point by being directly involved in what the Empire is doing in a way that Perrin just isn't. They have to come face to face with the atrocities that the Empire, and therefore they, are committing, and it seems like this is what Luthen's backstory was hinting at. Perrin, though, does have a potential path in. Mon Mothma is a senator trying to oppose what Palpatine is doing, but Perrin simply never had his position challenged the way that many of these other characters have. Which again, I don't think that's an excuse for his tacit support. I think it's a warning for what an action can actually look like. You don't have to be some frothing at the mouth Imperial supporter to be part of what keeps the system in place. While his place on the upper crust of society may give him a bit more obvious of a level of privilege than most of what the audience can relate to, his unwillingness to challenge a system which isn't directly threatening that privilege is probably a bit more familiar. He has the luxury of his support for the Empire, or lack thereof, being a choice he gets to make on his own time, at his convenience, unlike, say, Cassian, who regularly finds himself in a position where he either has to give something up or take the fight to the Empire. It's not purely an academic question for him the way it would be for Perrin. To paraphrase the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, is Perrin a coward or has he just never been tested? The second possibility I want to explore is the potential that he's a bit more plugged in than he actually seems. There was almost a scene in the show which would have made that explicit, but I think there's some other evidence for it which we'll go over. Writer Tom Bissell spoke about a cut scene in an interview with Backstory magazine, which I'll link to in the description. The scene was, quote, Perrin just saying, I knew what you were up to this whole time, they talked to me, every week they'd interrogate me, I never said a word. You didn't trust me, you could have trusted me. And the heartbreak she would feel in that moment of this guy that she'd pushed out could have been reliable. The double heartbreak of her walking away from her life, thinking she's dropping this deadbeat husband who never supported her, and then the double dagger stab. But that's headcanon, that didn't happen. End quote. But while that last line is entirely true, this is just objectively not what happened in the show, I think we can see hints of Perrin's apathy not really running as deep as it may seem, setting up for the kind of scene that's being talked about there. There's discussions throughout Season 1 where Perrin was trying to figure out what Mon Mothma was doing. He seems actually disappointed that others are more aware of what she's doing than he is, and that he wasn't informed about her work on a charitable foundation, for example. In the conversation with both Mon and Takolma, even Mon teases him about how at the Academy at 15, when they were all in school together, Perrin was the Academy firebrand. He was as passionate about these issues as anyone else, if not more so. So while that scene ultimately didn't make it in, I think a lot of Perrin's potential to be an asset to Mon gets overshadowed by the presentation of his unprincipled, almost apathetic attitude in many situations. And there are also hints that he does know what Mon Mothma is doing. When they're talking about drinks, Perrin laments that Mon used to like whatever they were ordering. She says she was just better at pretending before, which Perrin responds to by saying he finds that hard to believe. I think the subtext here is that Perrin is aware that Mon Mothma is putting up a front and that she is more involved in these rebel activities than she's letting on. As with the rest of this, your mileage may vary on how much you accept that interpretation, that's fine. But if you pair this with his frustration at being left out of Mon's so-called charitable foundation work, I think he ultimately does want to be more included despite his protest that all the political people are getting boring. If he really believed that Mon was just working on some charitable stuff, I don't think he would have bothered pestering her for this information. I'll also admit here that I'm a bit biased by information that comes from not just Andor itself, since the relationship between Mon Mothma and Perrin gets explored and fleshed out quite a bit in Mask of Fear by Alexander Freed. There's a lot in there about how, while their marriage has grown colder and they're not really in love in any real sense, Perrin has been a willing and able political asset in getting support from senators for Mon's causes, who are appealed to more by his kind of almost cavalier attitude than Mon's more principled stances. And while aging may have made him a bit more jaded as far as his former status as a firebrand, there's probably still some core of him that believes what the Empire is doing is wrong. He does at the very least seem to be aware of the importance of Mon Mothma to opposition movements. One of the final scenes in Season 1 is in their car, where Mon confronts Perrin about alleged gambling, something which was apparently a problem for him in the past. And while it's possible he's just lying to cover up a return to an old problem, I think his indignation and denial, along with his assertion that it's being done as a way to get at Mon, is genuine. With Mon being as important as she is to dissent within the Empire, and with them at least putting up a united front as a couple, even without that cut scene, it seems like the Empire would be willing to pursue Perrin as a way to spy on or undermine Mon Mothma. And with what we see of how the ISB operates in the show, it would be more surprising if the ISB wasn't doing this. In that very scene, when Perrin says someone is lying to her, it cuts to the driver Cloris, who was in fact lying to and spying on her. But Mon, along with the audience, have kind of been primed to assume Perrin would be against what Mon is doing, or at least it would be too big of a risk to tell him. One thing I don't like about the quote from Bissell about the scene that was cut is that it puts the onus on Mon Mothma for not trusting Perrin when he could actually have been a bigger part of what she was doing. There may be elements of Mon taking on too many of Luthen's traits where she doesn't trust people enough, but when it comes down to it, Perrin's own attitude is what gave her and the audience that impression. So I want to be as clear as possible that I'm, again, not trying to absolve Perrin of responsibility for any of that in any way. I just think he's an interesting character where his motivations are probably a bit deeper than what they seem like on the surface. But that's going to do it for today. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. The vast majority of viewers on the channel aren't subscribed, and if I ever do manage to hit 100,000 subscribers, I can get a plaque, which I need to cover a hole in my wall, so it's very important we get there eventually. Besides that, though, Andor has been an incredible show, and I'm glad a character as minor as Perrin has still given me so much to think about. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know your thoughts on Andor as a whole there too. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time.